Welcome to the Revenue Builders Podcast, a weekly show featuring B2B sales leaders and executives. Hosted by five-time CRO John McMahon and Force Management co-founder John Kaplan, the show goes behind the scenes with the people who have been there, done that, and seen the results. If you enjoy our content, please subscribe, rate, and review the show to help us reach more people. Revenue Builders is brought to you by Force Management. We help companies improve sales performance, executing the growth strategy at the point of sale. Find us at forcemanagement.com. Enjoy today's episode.
Welcome, Dan Barrett. It's been a while. How are you, Dan?
Great, thank you. How are you?
Good. You all right?
I'm wonderful. I'm ready to go.
Say hi to John Kaplan. Cap, say hi to Dan.
Dan, nice to meet you, brother. Heard a lot about you.
Nice to meet you too. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us.
So, Dan, you have a unique background in the sense that you were, especially for like a senior vice president of customer success, because you were a salesperson your entire career. You were the VP of Northern Europe for MongoDB when you were asked by Cedric, the CRO, to run customer success and a couple other organizations. What were your thoughts when you were approached by Cedric to run, customer success? Did you think he was crazy, or did you think that you were crazy for entertaining the idea?
Well, as you know, he's a good sales guy, right? So he was good at selling me on the idea. I think, to be honest with you, at the time, I wasn't being really honest. I wasn't 100% sure, but. I definitely needed to do something new, as I've been doing the same role for a long time, and I needed a change. But I think when he first approached me, I was like, dude, I don't know anything about customer success. Like I actually, as a rep, I never even worked with a CSM. It's like a relatively new thing. When I was a rep at ServiceNow, we didn't even have CSMs then, so I'd never even worked with a CSM. So it was a little. I guess daunting or a step into the unknown. And a lot of people, like in interviews or if I'm meeting new people, it's the first thing they always ask me, like, how did you how and why did you make the change? And then the other thing they always ask me is like, it must be so different. Like, it must be so different to sales. And I think the reality is, at a certain level, like leading a team, a lot of things are very similar. They're the same. Like, are you recruiting well? Do you have a good plan? Are you measuring the right things? Are you developing your team and developing people? Obviously, like, the job is different, but a lot of things are very similar.
And what made you decide that, okay, this is something that I'm willing to do? Was it something you heard about the opportunity?
Apart from Cedric's sales skills in selling me on the role, I think my long-term goal, I think, is to be a CRO. And I think the modern CRO, just having kind of top-down large enterprise sales is probably not enough anymore. I think the world of enterprise software and SaaS has changed a lot over the last few years, as you guys will know. And so, we're living in this, consumption-driven world where, and very, self-service and kind of product-led forward. And so that role is now very different to what it used to be before. And so you need to be able to, and customer success is a key part of that. And so, I think sales, a lot of people say, like, you moved out of sales. I don't really feel like I did. I think it's all, I mean, most of the value, the lifetime value you get from a customer happens post when you sign the first deal. And so understanding that part of the business and building those kind of skills, was really the one of the primary drivers for me. And plus, because it has such an opportunity to make a huge business impact.
Yeah. And now that you're in the role, how often are salespeople, because you said you never interfaced with CSMs, how often are salespeople interfacing with you and your team?
I mean, every day. I think that was like the first job was to was to get the sales team and the CSM team much tighter aligned. Like that was like basically job number one when I started, because they used to sit in like completely different functions. Almost by design, they were kind of kept separate, and it made no sense to me. And so like now they should be joined at the hip. And a key part of the field team, the rep, the SA, the CSM should all be joined at the hip.
Yeah. And how are you organized now? You said, I know that you have some other groups besides customer success. What other groups do you also have?
Yeah, so I have customer success, I have product-led sales, account management, and renewal. So product-led sales is a team that we have about 45,000 self-service customers that sign up through the website, swipe their credit card, or through the cloud providers marketplace. And they can be everything from like a student or a developer working on something that's like a home project, through to like huge customers that end up being like multi-million-dollar customers. And the job of this team is to, I guess, kind of sift for gold. So to try and identify the high potential accounts within that segment. So make sure they have an amazing experience for the workload they've already selected Mongo for, but then to acquire new workloads at scale. So they're kind of like a high velocity workload acquisition engine, and that interlock between self-service and the field. So they also look for outlier accounts.
And there's a commonality, it sounds like, between customer success and product-led sales, because those self-service customers initially need to be nurtured and implement the solution the right way, like you discussed, so that there can be renewals and there can be upsells, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's super important because the thing about Mongo is it's a complex product. It's a data platform. One of its major benefits is its simplicity, and it's super easy to get started. But like, it's the last 5% that makes a difference between, do they have an amazing go live, or do they have performance issues in the future as they start to scale? Or increasingly in today's climate, are they getting best bang for the buck? Like, obviously capital is a lot less free and easy than it was 12, 18 months ago. And so like a big part of the work that we help our customers with in that space is making sure that they can optimize their footprint as small as possible.
So before we dive deeper into those mechanics, I really want to get into those. You said something very interesting that I'd like you to kind of level set the audience on. We got a bunch of people listening, Dan. We have executives, we have sellers, we have technical people, we have financial institutions that listen. I wonder if you wouldn't mind, you said when you showed up, we were in silos. Can you just kind of describe the problem statement before you took over and kind of brought your processes in place? Can you help us get familiar with our audience, familiar to what do the problems look like? So if somebody goes into a company and you don't have alignment between, customer success and enterprise sales, or sales of the front end part, can you tell us what those problems typically start to look like so our audience can identify with them?
Yeah, I mean, they were everything from the basic ones, like, the rep or the sales leader never turns up to my weekly meetings. It's like a good telltale sign. And, in my experience of being a sales leader, the reason you don't turn up to meetings is because people don't add any value to you. Like, you're busy. It's a bit like the modern equivalent of John's in tray. Like if the memos aren't adding any value to you, you just put them in the bin, right? And so there's lots of people that want to have a meeting with you, and if you're not adding value to that sales leader, to that rep, like, why would they spend their time meeting with you on a weekly basis? And so I think there was a complete disconnect between like measurement and metrics of like how the teams were compensated, but even more fundamentally, even understanding like how each teams were compensated and how the work of each team actually complemented each other. And so the first thing we did was just like level set on like, what do reps care about? What do they get paid on? What do sales leaders care about? What do they get paid on? Like, how do you map into that? How do you add value? How does the great work that you do actually impact them on a day-to-day basis? And so very quickly, as soon as you start adding value, people want to meet with you. So I think that would be the first thing, is like that misalignment of value.
How do you know? How do you know who does what when? So like when I walk into companies, I normally ask on this subject, I'm like, hey, who owns client success? And that's a great discovery question, open-ended, with people answering it all different kind of ways. They answer it from a comp perspective. They answer it from a client engagement perspective. How did you bring everything into kind of one site? Like, who's doing what when? How do you figure that out?
I mean, that has been a journey. It's not an easy thing. Roles and responsibilities, because there's like the theoretical of like who should do what,
right?
But then there's the reality of like who has the skills, and then over time you have to build trust. First of all, you have to build the skills. Like at the end of the day, for CSMs actually have to have an impact. Like there's a lot of focus right now on obviously on cost and making sure that CEO, CFO are getting return for their investment. And so one of the key things is we need to be able to measure the impact that we have as an organization. But more fundamentally than that, we actually have to have the impact in the first place. Like you have to be making a difference. Think of it as like changing the course of history. Like our job isn't just to report on history.
Amen.
And just to show up and watch it happen. Our job is to actually change the course of history. So, like us just turning up for check-ins with customers and like seeing how they're doing and like having kind of tea and biscuits meetings, that's not really going to change the outcome. What we need, our teams doing is, and same with like reps, right? Their job is to change, the outcome that will happen by the interactions they have with that customer. And so, our job as CS or or product led or whatever, whichever team it is to actually have a meaningful impact on the outcomes our customers are trying to achieve. Then we need to be able to measure it, and then we need to be able to to report on it.
Now, Dan, I know that you significantly reduced churn while you've been there, and it's instead of having those, as you would call it, those team biscuit meetings, or a lot of times I used to.
That's a British thing. It'd be like a coffee and donuts meeting. In
coffee and donuts. Team biscuit is an English thing, right? Or a UK thing.
This sounds better.
Yeah.
It does sound better.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound as derogatory, maybe.
That's right.
But you moved basically from like break fix, which customer success came from, not necessarily at Mongo, but traditionally. And you moved more towards a proactive approach to customer success. Like you said, not waiting until something's broken, but trying to change the course of history. Can you talk a little bit about how you did that with the team?
I mean, I think there was a number of things, but like if I tried to boil it down to like the most simple piece, and this is, I guess, where my sales background came in. It was just running, having a disciplined process in the same way as you would around like forecast or pipeline inspection. It was like reviewing risk. So, on a weekly basis, we were reporting and reviewing risk. So like, that's just the making sure we can identify it, but then it was actually doing something about it. So, there's, until the customer actually churns or says they're not going to renew, like you still have a chance. And obviously the earlier and earlier that you can engage with the customer, the better chance you have of fixing their problems and getting them happy. And so all we really did, it was obviously a lot of work, and the team did some incredible work in actually working with our customers. We just put some discipline in place in terms of reviewing risks on a weekly basis and going to attack them as early as we can. And then bringing like the whole, resources of the company to bear to try and fix those problems.
And do you feel like you had to change the profile of some of the people that you're hiring now, or was it a combination of maybe changing some of the profiles of the people you hire and doing some training and enablement?
I think it's a bit of both. I think when I took over, when I took over CS, we were probably 50 people. We're now, I think my org's like, I don't know, 300 people.
Wow.
And so it's a bit like the people that get you from like 0 to 100 million versus the people that get you from 100 million to a billion, and the people that get you from a billion on. It's a different set of skills in certain situations, but it's also what people enjoy. And so the role was very like free and easy. Like you could come in, you had your set of accounts, and like you could go and do whatever you wanted. Whereas now, we have a much more sort of well-defined process and set of playbooks that are kind of instrumented and with kind of metrics. And so it's a different job than it was before. So part of it was might have been a skill thing, but part of it was also like a will thing. Like, did people actually want to be doing that kind of job, want to be part of that role? There's much more accountability expected from a CSM today than then. More metrics driven. I think, but there's been a huge amount of development. And I think one of the things that I'm most proud of is actually we developed a lot of our internal talent to promote through into first, second line leaders, and kind of blending that with bringing some experience in from the outside who have managed and led bigger teams, but also trying to keep that DNA of like the Mongo culture. I think has been what's enabled us to kind of scale and grow.
Let's stay on that topic for just a second, very specifically on profiles. I'd like you to make a couple of comments. What have you learned about those skills and attributes that tend to lend themselves better for this role, if it's different at all than a regular, than sales? And then also, if you wouldn't mind commenting on CS leaders. I find that companies just struggle putting the right people like you, putting the right people in place. So could you comment on those two?
So I think obviously the profile is different, right? Like, a rep versus a CSM is a different profile, but there are some similarities. Coachability, drive. I think curiosity as well.
Yeah, big one for success.
Yeah. But I think also for reps, like, great reps are also curious and genuinely interested in like what their customers are trying to do. I think with CS, it's that customer centricity, like the biggest strength, I think, of a great CSM is that they just want to go above and beyond for their customers. Like they are highly motivated by doing a great job for our customers.
And outcomes, right?
I'm not saying reps aren't, but their motivations are, they like to win, and they like to beat their numbers, like my team does, but they would rather get a great outcome for the customer first. Like, that's the thing that gets them out of bed in the morning.
How about the leaders? I find people really don't get this right, man. They mess it up. And leaders, Dan, sometimes I give advice to people. I'm like, hey, be the same before you try to be different. So a lot of people that go in these roles in customer success, they're trying to create their own processes, their own metrics, their own mantras, or what have you, and they create these islands. What is a good profile of a success leader right now?
It's a really good question. I think if I think about like my leadership team, I look for people that have experience and that want to like own a number.
Yeah.
So even though they don't own like a new business number, although in fact they do own a growth number, it's that accountability to the number, I think, is the biggest thing that that is not pervasive across every CS organization. And so I think for me, that's like the non-negotiable, is that accountability to the number. I think the at a broader sense, though, like, how people kind of get it wrong. I think it's also about making sure that you are building a CS org for the right reasons, and that customer success is not like the panacea to everything. Like, it's not a silver bullet to a product that doesn't work, or a product that doesn't have product market fit, or bad deals. Like, there's like they're good, but they're not magicians. So quite often it's used as like a sticking plaster, but there's more fundamental issues that need to be fixed first.
And then, Dan, when you went in, how difficult was it for you to truly understand the root causes of churn? So what you've talked about, you put some discipline into a process, you reviewed risk. Those sound like, really good behaviors for any organization. But then at the same time, you were new to this opportunity. How difficult was it for you to get down to what are the real root causes of churn?
It's actually really hard, and it's still really hard today, because I think for a couple of reasons. One, like, we have reporting and risk categories, and like we can report just like everybody else.
Right.
But the reality is that most of these situations are much more complicated and much more nuanced than like a single like subcategory. Like, for customer, like for example, we could report that the customers left because of price. Well, the reality is customer never leaves because of price. Mm-hmm. Customer leaves because they weren't getting value, and then the root cause of that could be because we overpromised the customer when or it wasn't a good use case fit in the first place, or they had a bad implementation that meant that they were oversized. Like, there's lots of like root cause issues. So it's and often it's two or three of these things combined together, and a series of things over a period of time that causes the churn reason, if you like. And so I think it's important to separate out like the end reason versus the root causes, and there isn't really any substitute for that than like just getting into the details and talking to customers. And I think that's like one of the big things. If you really want to be customer centric, I actually you were talking about it in another one of your podcasts about like voice of the customer, and actually truly listening to like what your customers say, and really thinking about like, well, are the decisions that we're making as a business really what our customers need or want? Like, I don't know, product roadmap would be a classic example of like, are we actually building things our customers want and need versus like the things that we want to build? Or we designed a process for like onboarding our customers. Did we ever like talk to a customer and find out like what do they actually need during that process? Like, what's most value? And you find that a lot of times you don't. Like, you're in a room, you're on a whiteboard, you're doing stuff because you think you know better, and actually there is no substitute just to actually go and talk to customers and understand like what really went wrong, what can we do better, like tell me about your experience, and you learn so much.
Do you think that customers today are expecting you to take steps to jointly own their business outcome? Like Johnny was talking about business outcomes, where you understand their goals, you develop a methodology to achieve those goals, maybe set checkpoints to monitor the progress towards those goals. Are you finding that more and more customers are asking you to accept responsibility for that along with them?
And if yes, how does that manifest itself, and how do you respond as a company if they say, we want you to have skin in the game, so we're willing to pay you, but we got to get outcomes? Have you faced that, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely becoming more and more prevalent from our professional services organization. Like, yeah, okay, especially as we're starting to get into like building actual applications, we want to be on the hook for the actual delivery. But I think maybe not going quite that extreme. I think customers' expectations are changing and are growing. I think what good looked like 2 or 3 years ago, is probably below par. And the cost of change for organizations, so for customers now, is lower than it ever has been before. They have more choices. It's easier to change. See, one of the interesting journeys that Mongo's been on over the last couple of years is kind of moving to a consumption-based model.
Right.
And I remember when we moved from like perpetual to subscription, it was like it's the ultimate test of value. Like if you're not getting value, you can just turn your subscription off. Sure, but I've just given you a 3-year commit for like $1 million and spent 6 months and $250,000 in implementing the software. Yeah, I can change, but it's not that easy. In a consumption world where customers sign a $0 commit contract, they only pay for what they use. That's like the real test of it. And there are like other options that they can go and switch to, easily. Then, and so therefore you're only getting paid if your customer's using your software. You only book revenue when your customer's using your software. And the customer only uses your software when they're getting value from it. Like that's the sort of ultimate test of value. And so customers' expectations now are higher than they ever were before. And it's easier for them to change anyway before. And so if you're not getting customers to their business outcomes, like during the sales process, we capture like what are the business outcomes they're trying to achieve. Right. As we go through to onboarding, we align on these are the success metrics. This is the business outcome, and here is the plan to get there. That's like step one. But then the other piece is like actually come back to this changing the course of the history. It's no good just like reporting on what it is they want to do. How are you going to help them get to those outcomes? Mm-hmm.
So Dan, how do you marry up those? How do you marry up those actions? You said focus on business outcomes. You've got a selling organization. You've got a customer success organization. You have a services organization. I find that companies, if they don't believe you understand their business and you don't demonstrate that you've listened to them throughout the engagement, they're gone in today's environment. So how do you ensure that everybody's using the same language, or how does it carry forward? How do you avoid like handoffs or whatever? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The typical problems,
sure.
Typical problems in alignment.
That's a great question. I mean, we spent the last 2 years building and rolling out effectively our customer journey and getting all of the customer facing teams aligned to that journey, including even organizing our teams around it. Like we're actually segmenting our sales teams, our go-to-market teams aligned to that customer journey. And then trying to, one of the investments that we've made in the last kind of 18 months is actually building tooling and systems to really orchestrate and join up that end-to-end journey. So that we're trying to make the handovers as seamless for our customers and for our internal teams and efficient as possible. And so like, we are by no means at the finish line there, but it's making a big difference in terms of trying to join up the experience for our customers.
Awesome. Hey, I got a question for both you guys real quick before we change gears. If people are moving to consumption, if that's the way the industry and software is really going, and people are looking for outcomes and insights into the business, I hear customers saying, if you can provide me insights to my usage and how to use it and how to do it better, I'll consume more. So that's why customer success is more and more important now than it's ever been. But you got to help me. The data last year said the first people to go in the software industry last year were customer success when they made cuts. Everybody was making, not everybody, but a lot of people were making cuts last year. Why is it that the first thing that they go to is cutting customer success? What's your opinion on that, Dan? Or am I full of it?
No, I think it's a fair point. I think the biggest reason is because I think a lot of customer success organizations either aren't delivering an impact or they aren't able to demonstrate and measure the business impact. Like, we've done a lot of work, John, as you know, over the last kind of 12 months on like payback periods and like ROI. And so, but obviously that fundamentally you have to actually be able to deliver a payback and a value in the first place. But if you do that, then being able to measure it and demonstrate it, and for a lot of organizations that they're not able to do that. And so I think it's an easy thing to cut. If you're not having an impact or you're not able to measure that impact, it's an easy line item to remove from the balance sheet.
So you're probably saying that if companies are talking about cutting in that area, the first thing you'd look for is, well, how are we measuring success? And what you're saying is if a lot of companies don't have good metrics and good measurements in place about what outcomes should be at what particular points of the engagement, that's probably why they'd go to cutting any organization first without the data. So that's a really,
or maybe they're not even having the impact in the first place, right? Like that's the other thing. But if you can demonstrate, like, here's the impact of CS or PLS, like this is how many dollars they save the organization every year, and here's how many dollars they find in new opportunities that they pass to the sales team every year. Then. And obviously, and if that number is attractive, then it's an easy investment decision. And if you can measure it, you can also improve it. And so, we still have opportunity to kind of improve in some of those areas internally, but at least we can measure it and we can deliver a return.
And
on a
go ahead, Dan. Sorry,
I was going to say, on a $1 billion plus renewal base. A percent either way makes a pretty big difference.
Huge
in terms of revenue, and so it becomes even more important the bigger you get.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I think most CEOs and CFOs look at CS as a cost center, and to Dan's point, if you can't really measure it and they can't see an impact and nothing's changing, okay, I'll just cut some people in there because I'm not really. I can't show that I'm getting any value for my money. For every head that's in CS, what am I getting in return? But if you're doing the type of job that Dan is doing, where he's decreased churn, and to Dan's point, for every decrease in 1 percentage point of churn, what does that equate to in revenue for the company, right? And not only that revenue in the company, but a lost customer, a new referenced customer, a customer that might help you extend a new upsell or reference to another customer in another organization. What is that worth? Right. And when you can measure that and see it, then also I think you start to see that, like Dan is building instrumentation into the software also, where you can see like what, customers are doing so they can get more triggers to CS to become more efficient. So now you start to see, okay, well, what is the cost for me to manage every customer, and how many CSMs do I need per customer? Is that going down or up? So if you can look at those metrics, to Dan's point, then I don't think you're looking at it as a cost center anymore. You're starting to say, man, this could be a profitability center for me, done right.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, like in CSQLs, the team probably pays for itself. In expansion opportunity, like a good CSM org should be able to pay for itself in expansion opportunities that it finds. And like, there's a whole philosophical debate around, should CSMs like carry a quota for finding new opportunities, which I obviously firmly think that they should do. Not that we want to turn them into a sales organization, because they're not. And in fact, like, that's part of their secret sauce, right? Is that they're not salespeople. They're 100% aligned on the success of their customers. But just as a natural byproduct of the great things they do, they will find opportunities. And I think a good CS team should be able to pay for itself, on its own.
Well, then they also become really valuable to the sales team too, because now,
yeah, for sure.
You were talking about your former company where you never really talked to a CS person. Now, if I think that CS person is really valuable, has some insight into what's going on in the company, and probably they're telling the CS person some things that they're probably not telling the salespeople.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
now
exactly.
I want to have conversations with my CSM, and I want to know what's going on, and I want to have a relationship with them. In fact, we had Mark Roberge on, and he was, the former CRO over at HubSpot. He got to the point where he was, and they were more inside sales, so it wasn't, enterprise outside sales. But he wound up taking desks and moving the CSM people to face, like put desk to desk with the salespeople, so that they actually would be a team and they could talk about the successes or failures of particular customers and what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong. So once they become more tightly integrated, I think then the power of CS and the CSM organization becomes, paramount to the success of the company.
You made an interesting point earlier around the the expansion, or like what is the lost opportunity cost of a churn customer. And I think churn is almost like the tip of the iceberg, for like especially for a company like Mongo, where we win like workload by workload. So like if we win, a large enterprise might have tens of thousands of applications. I'm like, we'll win one application with one sales cycle. And so reducing churn is actually just it's harder to measure like the opportunity cost. But if a customer has a poor experience with us as a vendor, we might not lose that initial workload. Let's say it's like $100,000 a year, right? We might not lose it because there's nothing wrong with it. But if they have a poor experience, like with support or with the sales team or with CS, or they just, the product isn't like amazing, think of the next 10 projects that they need to select a database for. Like we will never get a look into those. And it's very difficult to measure like that lost opportunity cost. But like the churn itself is really just the tip of the iceberg. Referrals, other projects, people moving to they move to the next company and they pick up the phone and bring you in, or they don't. Like that's what I'm saying. That the lost dollars is just actually a very small part of it.
Yeah, like you said, the churn risk is the lost renewals. They result in lost expansion opportunities or referenced opportunities, and then you have the capital risk, right? Of the high cost of constantly losing customers and having to get new customers, because it's so much more expensive to get new customers than to hold on to the existing ones.
Yeah.
And then your third point is really the competitive risk. Every time I lose a customer, that's an opportunity for the competition to come in and take my place, and for them to expand if they do CSM right.
Yep.
Right? If they do,
and not even losing the customer. It's just like it's just if we didn't delight the customer. It's like I think just having a great product on its own isn't good enough. It's like if you go to a restaurant and the food's great but the service is horrible, you probably wouldn't go back.
Right.
So I got a question. You guys are talking about reference customers. I love this conversation because today's metrics create tomorrow's proof points. So we kind of made that link. And now from a proof point perspective or a reference customer perspective, I'd like to hover a little bit here. How do you, Dan, ensure things like maybe cultivating advocates as one area? That's a big topic of conversation typically in the post-sale. And then what I'd also like you to talk about is in your process, how do you ensure that you're helping the customer and your people rise above the noise? And I'd like to slip into kind of like economic buyer engagement in your process. First, I'll go back. How do you cultivate advocates, or do you do that, or is there a process for that?
Yes. So actually, one of the things that we so kind of a good segue to one of my other teams. So one of the new teams that we built launched at the beginning of this financial year was our account management team.
Yeah.
And so the idea of this was twofold. One was, how do we drive a more cost-effective way to service some of our more mature customers? But the other thing is also like, how do we meet our customers where they're at?
Yeah.
So like if you're a digital like kind of native startup company, you've basically built your app on Mongo. There might be additional workloads to go and acquire, but like you're all in on Mongo as your platform. What you need from us as a partner, you don't need a rep like cold calling every developer in the organization. You're already all in on Mongo, right? Like it's not really what you need as a company. And so we built this account management function specifically to deal with those customers in that advocacy stage. And so their job is to build long-term partnerships, meaningful relationships, and to create champions and advocacy champions for us in those companies. It's kind of almost like selling from within. Like, yes, they carry a number, but really their job is to build like meaningful long-term relationships. And so like we've actually, coming back to what I said before, we've been like super deliberate about our segmentation in terms of how we actually align our go-to-market based on like what the needs of the customer are.
And what about with all? So you have kind of like almost you have influence end to end on the customer journey. It looks like. What advice could you give people out there on, and even with a product like yours, economic buyer involvement during the engagement? Do you have any wisdom there on when, how? I'd be interested to hear your perspective on that.
Well, I think it's changed over the last few years. When I joined Mongo, and we're very much like a medic, slow down, go high, build a business case.
Yeah.
Like slow the sales process down, build consensus. Like that was our kind of our playbook really. And obviously getting to the economic buyer and doing our go no go was like a key part of that process. One of the interesting sort of dynamics or changes in a consumption world, and especially with the way that people kind of build applications today, is it's a little bit more, in a lot of companies, it's more developer centric. It might be like a squad leader or senior developer that actually gets to pick the technology. And they might not be the economic buyer. They're probably not the economic buyer. They're certainly not when they get started, but at some point they may, we would need to get hired. In that kind of situation, the sales process, the way you engage those customers needs to be much more agile. It's kind of meeting the customer where they're at. And so it then actually pushes the onus of how do you then capture the business value and then make sure that you can then almost like go back post-sale and make sure that the economic buyer understands the value that they're getting from their investment. Because some of these applications might start on a $0 contract. They might be spending like $1,000 a month. Suddenly the app takes off, goes live, and they're spending $100,000 a month. And at that point, somebody's going to care about how much they're spending. And so it's that finding that kind of, it's like a different engagement, different point of engagement, but no less important, maybe just later on in the process.
You're highlighting something I just want to say for the audience. In my opinion, how you're doing it right when you can map the customer's journey by what your people do and how they do it and map it to outcomes. I call it a champion letter. On any account that you have inside of your company, if you can't right now, especially in a consumption model, if you can't right now write a letter to the economic buyer or an email to the economic buyer highlighting the champions, what they've done, what business problems they're addressing, how they addressed it, how they gave you the proper information to make a great, great implementation, and then finish it off with a proof point. Those are companies that you keep for life, and we call those champion letters. So for our listeners out there, if you talk to your people right now and you say, "Hey, let me see your top 10 accounts, whatever." Okay, these are my top 10 accounts. Can you write a champion letter right now? If not, why not? And if you can't, in this world, you're at risk. So that's just a comment. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, love that. I think it's also, things change, right? So like, customer buys your software 3 years ago, you have a champion, everything's going great, champion leaves, software's still working, but like, does anybody there know the value they're getting from it? And so like that selling, the selling doesn't stop when you sign the deal. In fact, in a consumption world, kind of almost like the selling starts. And so being able to, it's one thing making sure that they're getting value. The other thing is also making sure they understand the value they're getting and they continue to get that value and the value they're getting.
Yeah, I think you're also pointing out another reason why sales is getting tighter with CS is because, to your earlier point, when you sold a subscription deal, the rep felt like, even if I did a 1-year deal, I have some time. I got time, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I got paid. And it was a pretty good sized deal. So I got a nice commission check. On the consumption, you're pointing out that even from the rep standpoint, I have no time. This thing could churn at any moment, right? I'm only paid on consumption, and I'm paid on 0 or a really small deal. The only way I make money is if this customer's successful and continues to consume. So that's why I need a really good relationship with, my CSM.
Yeah, and it's at all levels, because like now our forecast calls in a consumption model, our forecast calls, it's not like in a consumption world, like your forecast calls can be a little bit like pig measuring. Like every week you get your tape measure out and you like measure it and see if it's got any bigger or not. But again, it doesn't actually make the pig any fatter. And so like now our forecast calls are like cross-functional, right? So they're sales, CS, SA, PS, talking about the workloads that are in the funnel. Like, okay, have we got our PS scheduled? Anything we can do to accelerate the the timeline? What can we do? What risks are there? It's all about like, the close isn't the signing the contract. The close is like when the customer's live, successful, and happy. And so it actually just completely changes the focus.
Yeah.
Do you have a the words operating rhythm are pounding in my head right now, and I find that companies that do this engagement model really well, they have a really well documented operating rhythm, which is based on the customer's operating rhythm for things like QBRs or whatever. What do you call the interaction between your sales organization and the customers at a periodic point of time, at those points of time? What does an ideal operating rhythm look like?
I mean, we being honest, like I think we don't have a super structured. I think because of the nature of because we're very app by app.
Yep.
It's not like someone buys Mongo and it's like wall to wall Mongo. We have multiple different champions, multiple different projects, all with like different timelines. So it's less structured from like a calendar perspective. Like, once a quarter we do this. It's actually more aligned to, we call it the workload journey. So we effectively, every workload, every app that a customer puts on Mongo goes through a journey, and it's kind of aligned to like the software development lifecycle. They're in development, they go live, they're in production, and we kind of align our journey to that. On top of that, we also have this like account maturity journey, which is like, how do you take a company from being a prospect all the way through to being in advocacy stage. And so the workload journey is workload by workload, and so we have a set of like activities that we do along that journey. But then the customer maturity, like the account maturity journey, is about how do we then like build executive sponsorship? How do we build technical maturity? How do we build strong relationships with the partners? Obviously, we're part of a stack, so how do we build relationships with the cloud providers, with the SIs, with other ISVs? And so like being deliberate about how do you help a customer improve their maturity of Mongo is like a big focus for next year. It's like a big launch for us for next year.
Now, Dan, you've been in the role how long? Like 2 years now or more?
2.5 years now.
2.5 years. So now when you look back, do you think your background in sales helped you or hurt you in certain areas as a senior VP of customer success? Can you talk maybe a little bit about, here's where I know it absolutely helped me, and here's where I had to learn one or two things?
I definitely had to learn a few things. I had to tone down my use of sporting analogies a little bit.
Yeah.
So like I've kind of I've weaned myself off so many sporting analogies.
Kaplan wouldn't be able to make it in that role any.
I'm out.
And you have to learn to modulate your kind of leadership style, because it's different managing like reps and RDs and VPs than it is managing like CSMs and CS leaders. But it's been great. It's been great. I think it's less around having a background in sales or not. I think where I feel fortunate is having worked for some amazing leaders in my time, and learning a lot about development, about recruitment, about just because you have a playbook that works somewhere doesn't mean it's going to work somewhere else. Like learning to kind of figure stuff out. So I don't know if it's necessarily my sales background. I think it's more like having worked for some amazing leaders and with some amazing leaders in my time in sales has kind of given me this, I guess, the skills and the knowledge to adapt it to what I do today. There are obviously some core transferable skills like customer facing and discovery and building champions and those kind of things, but I think it's actually was more of those It was all those QBRs I did with you, John, back in the day.
Holy smokes! And you're still alive. You're still alive.
He's a better man.
It's all it's all the stories about Grey Boy the cat and John's inbox. They still live with me today.
Yeah. Hey Dan, were you like me? And the trick was just don't look him in the eye. And that beady eye he has, just don't look him in the eye.
Everybody's has had their pants pulled down by John and a QBR at some point in their life. It's character building.
Amen.
But we used to have this saying, which is like, when you're on the savannah, you don't have to outrun the lion, just the guy standing next to you.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Especially in a forecast session.
Exactly.
Dan, you've always been a really good leader and always stepped up to no matter what, opportunity or challenge that you had. But I always kind of thought that you were had a little bit of more of an analytical mind also. Do you think that you have that, and did that help you in the role?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely very data driven, and combine that with like a strong intuition. So I think those skills have helped me in this new role. I think that actually one of the things I've done over the last couple of years, I've done a lot of work on like myself in figuring out like what gives me energy, what motivates me, what am I good at, what am I not good at. There's a long list of things I'm not good at, but one of the things I realized that really gives me energy and that I enjoy doing and I am good at is kind of being creative. So I'm like a problem solver. I can come up with like innovative ways to solve a problem. And so like when you're building and scaling organizations from scratch or like transforming them, you need to be able to do that, right? Like you need to be able to analyze the situation, understand like what's not working and come up with a solution for it, as opposed to just like executing. I can do the execution stuff, but I find the building and transforming and creating the thing that gives me most energy and most inspiring.
Yeah. Cap, you have any more questions for
gosh, you covered so much: engagement models, metrics, cultivating advocates. We talked about just some great things today, and I think your perspective by being involved in the customer journey in your own journey at different places of meeting the customer where they are is just giving you a really good outlook on what that journey looks like from end to end. So I really enjoyed the conversation today. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah,
me too.
And Dan, I think you've made a profound impact on MongoDB and bringing your leadership to the CS team. And I think that companies like Mongo that continue to really invest, in CS, I think it's a competitive advantage. Whereas like years ago, it was a cost center. Done right, it really is a competitive advantage, especially as you had pointed out multiple times in a consumption world. I don't know how it can't be. Done right can't be a competitive advantage. So well done, Dan.
Very kind of you to say. It's been a pleasure spending the time with you. Again, love the shirt and look forward to seeing you again soon.
All right.
Thanks. Hey, Johnny, before you wrap it, let's put a little plug in there for and we can have our producers put a little plug in there for Allison Pickens' episode on customer success that was done last year. Wow, I can't remember when it was done. It was a really good episode. And she also wrote a book called The Customer Success Economy. So I think that'll add a lot of value to the conversation that we had today. Thanks again, Dan.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks to everyone for listening to another episode of the Revenue Builders Podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to check us out at forcemanagement.com.